Welcome, everyone. We're just waiting for some members to join, and we'll start shortly. Okay, I believe everybody's here, so we can call the meeting to order. It's 1:02 p.m. I'd like to ask all participants who are attending to keep their microphones on mute. If you are not a member of the board or participating in the meeting, I'll ask that you please keep your camera off as well. We want to make sure that everybody is aware that the meeting will be posted onto YouTube following the conclusion of today. I'd also like to start off by sharing a few words for the community. This has been a week that has shaken our community to its core. It's difficult for me to find words to express the complex and heavy emotions that many of us have been experiencing. On behalf of the board, I want to take some time to share my deep gratitude to Chief Williams and his team, to every first responder, every frontline member, every civilian member who have continued to provide compassionate and diligent service to a traumatized community that is struggling with their grief. I also want to take a moment to speak directly to the diverse Muslim communities of London. Your board grieves with you. Your board stands with you. We understand your fear, but we are committed to ensuring your safety. We also know that our London Police Service is committed to your safety. You belong here today and every day. Do not be afraid to be who you are, and know that your community has your back. To our entire London community, this is us, this is our community, this is our world, this is our journey, and we will walk it together. I also want to take a moment to provide the community with some updates about activities of the board. We have struck 2 community advisory panels. One focuses on anti-racism, the other focuses on mental health and addictions. I want to thank all the community members that have stepped up to serve on these panels. The anti-racism panel has had 2 meetings, and the mental health and addictions advisory panel has had its first meeting. Last, I want to personally thank everyone for your kind messages related to the announcement that I am taking on a new professional role outside of London. I will continue to serve as chair of the London Police Services Board until the conclusion of the September meeting, and I will continue to serve as a board member until my appointment ends at the end of December. So with that, I'll ask for disclosures of interest. And noted. New business. We have a few items of new business. The first is the addition of 3 SIU reports, and the second is the addition of LPSB stipends. Can I get a motion to add these to the agenda? Moved by Mr. Lang, seconded by Mayor Holder. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Agenda item 2, the minutes of the LPSB April 15th public meeting. Can I get a motion to approve? Moved by Ms. Wollenreiter, seconded by Mr. Lang. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the public governance meeting update, item 5. I will report on behalf of Committee Chair Toth that on Tuesday, the public session for the Governance Committee was held. There are no motions for the board to approve today. During the course of the meeting, we covered our minutes, we reviewed some confidential legal and human resource matters and invoices, some SIU reports which have been moved to new business, as well as some confidential financial and human resource related agreements, and a funding agreement which provided funding renewal related to a human trafficking project. Can I get a motion that the board receives for informational purposes this verbal update? Moved by Mr. Lang, seconded by Councillor Helmer. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. The next item, item 6, June 2021 public correspondence. Correspondence is in your package. Can I get a motion that the board receives for informational purposes? It's public correspondence moved by Ms. Wollenreiter, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the 2020 Criminal Investigation Services Report, and I'll turn the floor over to Deputy Chief McIntyre.
Thank you, Chair, through you. The 2020 Criminal Investigation Services Report really is twofold. It looks at the workload done by our Criminal Investigative Division, and then it looks at clearance rates in a second table. So if I take you through the report, you'll see on the first page, it tracks over 3 years the workload coming into our investigative side. There's a couple notes I just want to highlight for you. When we talk about cases transferred to our CID unit, it's handled initially from the frontline officers, of course, and transferred into CID. There's a couple that get assigned to CID when certain criteria are met. The first criteria is criminal harassment. Those are often investigated by our frontline members. This table in part 1 demonstrates those occurrences where the suspect in a criminal harassment is not known. That is a defined major case, and they're handled differently in our CID side of the house. So I just bring that to your attention. Thefts over $5,000 are very similar. We often see those handled initially by the front line. They are transferred over when there are investigative leads for those thefts over $5,000. So I point those out because you'll see on table 2, the numbers change on you as we look at clearance rates. So the second part of this report looks at just that, clearance rates. We don't have the data, just for everyone's awareness, from StatsCan for 2020 yet. Those numbers normally come to us in July, but you'll see our numbers based on our database, and then the provincial and national 2017 and 2018 numbers, 2019 numbers, but just not 2020. So when you look at all of those, you can see from all of the categories that the LPS clearance rates are above that for the provincial and national clearance rates. So we're in good standing there. I look at these, and this report is really brought to you to look at trends, and you'll see that over the 3-year term here, but we're very much in line and exceeding those standards. So my recommendation is that the board receive the report, and I'm more than happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Any comments or questions? Councillor Helmer?
Thank you. I appreciate the report. There's a lot of information in a relatively short report. In the report, it sort of outlines that LPS clearance rates for these various kinds of investigations for different kinds of offenses is, I think it's described as sort of similar to the provincial and national levels. But when you read the report, it's actually quite substantially higher than the provincial and national numbers for some of these offenses in particular. And I just wonder if the deputy chief or the chief want to speak to what is going on in terms of the performance of LPS. I know there's only a few years of data here, but it's consistently higher in many of these cases than the provincial average and also the national average. And I just wonder if you could speak to that, if any of those things require sort of special attention, or you want to point out why you might be doing better than the average.
I can speak and the chief can jump in there if I don't cover off all the pieces. I think one of the interesting components is the quality of investigation at the outset. I think that helps. We are a large enough service to have many tools available to us, which assist very much in finding evidence and then solving a case at the back end. So for example, when you get into property related offenses or any of those, we have a full-fledged canine team that provides huge investigative assistance. That is open to us, where many other smaller services wouldn't have that capability or the timeliness of that capability. I think it speaks to just performance excellence. Although I'm biased because it's our service, I think you see the sheer volume of training that goes into occurrences and having them start out right allows our investigators on the backside to finish those off. Our working relationship with the attorney's office, our working relationship with many community partners to really lock in some of these aspects that have huge assistance moving forward, be it the quality of interviews, the trauma-informed lens on interviews, which allows for additional disclosure and risks really that quality coming over from the complainants or the victims in the matter. So I think it's very multifaceted. I think the oversight London has is huge, and the quality of investigators with really specificity on these heavy hitters is tremendous in London. We see, because we are a mid-sized city, exposure, maybe that's a bad thing, unfortunately, to many of these occurrences, and have tremendous skill in investigating them. So I say that, of course, knowing that London is, of course, our service, and I'm proud of them, but it speaks right at the outset to investigative excellence and our tracking. The big cases, your major case designates, we are audited and really are above the bar on many things with those audits, and just the checks and balances that go into place to make sure we have thorough investigations before the courts and can clear those with great confidence. So I hope that helps to answer some of those. The chief may have additional comment.
Through you, Chair, I would only add that, and you sort of alluded to this, is that the crime stats and number of reports is really a reflection of reporting behavior. And we know that many crime types are not reported. So the other factor is just the the willingness and maybe the confidence in the public to come forward and to know that their concerns, whatever the report, whatever it is going to be addressed. I think that's a factor. We know, we looked a few years ago, and I don't have the numbers in front of me. We know that our officers per capita lay more charges than on average than the rest of the province. It doesn't necessarily mean that our city, has a higher crime rate, but it may just be a function of the reports that are received that actually come to our attention. So, thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Lang?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments. The police budget is the most significant expenditure for the City of London, and it's scrutinized very, very carefully. And I just want to make a comment generally from a value for money standpoint. When I see reports like this, and thank you very much for the report, Deputy, it highlights to me the effectiveness and the efficiency and the excellence that the LPS puts forward on a day-to-day basis. And when I speak of value for money, I want to remind my colleagues and the general public that London has consistently had one of the lowest costs of policing per capita, not just in Ontario, but across the country. So I would like to compliment the administration on just how that money is being spent in your stewardship, and more importantly, the results, because it's clear that the City of London, the citizens of the City of London are well served based on how we're stacking up against our colleagues across not only the province, but nationally. So I think it's important that we recognize, as a board, we're responsible for the oversight of a very large amount of money with the police services budget. And I do believe as a member of that board, is we're getting excellent value for money. And I'd like to commend the leadership and the administration for their efforts.
Thank you. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just jumping off from what Mr. Lang has said. I agree 100% with his comments. I also think that the results that we're seeing here in this report are indicative that it's not business as usual here in London and with London Police Service, that our leadership team are interested in doing things a little bit differently and looking to use combinations of expertise and education and research and learning as they go along. And I think because of that, we're seeing these kinds of results. I think that this is a really good report. I'm looking at the reported the CID performance indicators in that Part 1 table, and there are a lot of crimes that have gone down in 2020. You can see that because of the pandemic. We're seeing some that have gone up, and again, I think probably related to the pandemic. Speaking of child abuse investigations and sexual assault, but the one that's making me curious is that hate-motivated occurrences in propaganda. So there's quite a spike in 2020, and my question is, are they reported? When somebody calls in and makes a report, is it reported as a hate-motivated occurrence, or does that categorization happen with London Police? And so, is there really a spike in those occurrences? Is it a change in how we are categorizing these incidents? Is it a change in how they're being reported? I'm just wondering if there is a way we can understand that big change.
Yeah, thank you for the question, through you, Chair. My next report speaks to this topic as well, but I can say that in a general sense, the reporting of these crimes is up. So sometimes it is reported into police as a hate crime or a hate motivated or hate biased based offense. Sometimes when it's reviewed, we designate it as such based on the content. So sometimes it doesn't come in right away as such, but we designate it after the fact. Every occurrence with any type of hint of any type of hate is removed over to the CID side. They review it from there. They have specialized training in that regard to categorize and to flag something accordingly. So you'll see it kind of come in both ways. Do I think the reporting is up? Yes, I do. Do I think it is still vastly underreported? 100%. And so I can speak to that further in my report on this and the next agenda item. I'll elaborate for you there, if that's okay.
Thank you. Any further questions for Deputy Chief? Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. I did have two questions about particular kinds of offenses and what's potentially behind the changes we've seen in the 2020 numbers compared to the previous couple of years. And I recognize we might not know definitively what the answer is for some of these things, but the decline in missing persons investigations, I wanted to ask about that because Certainly if 2018 is a kind of normal year rather than a really high year, that's quite a significant change to go down to just under 900. And also the increase in the arson, because although that's a small number of incidences, I guess in total, it's a pretty big change over the previous years, and obviously a concerning kind of offense. So I wonder if you have any ideas about what might be going on with those two kinds of offenses.
Absolutely. I'll give it my best shot, much of which will be anecdotal, but I can give you my best understanding of what's occurring there. If I go to arsons, we did see that go up. A lot of times that had to deal with vulnerable individuals in the community. A lot we saw through as a derivative of homelessness, people living rough, setting things on fire, be it for warmth, for a myriad of other things. We see an increase in our community, of course, in struggles with mental health. And a lot of those occurrences were not, a lot of those occurrences, a recent rash kind of in arsons, were all surrounding and involving really a vulnerable population. So I attribute that to, our issue with addictions in the downtown core, with homelessness, really just that vulnerable segment. Many of which were abandoned structures, many of which were, property I would say would be low in value. So not like they're setting whole places on fire or whatever, but it was definitely deemed to be arson, and troubling really the rise in it. But I would attribute it to those factors. In relation to missing persons, it's a great observation. I would say in part, we saw a lot of homeschooling, and of where kids were not displaced from the residence to the same. There was I see a piece of that I think would be an impact factor there, but in a general sense, I couldn't speak with certainty on why that is. Only assumptions that because the kids were out of school and often at home, there was greater supervision, there was less ability, if you will, for them to go missing. But I would just be assuming there without having to drill in further to that.
Thank you.
Any further questions? If not, can I get a motion that the board receives the report for informational purposes by Mr. Lang, seconded by Councillor Helmer? All in favor? Carried. Thank you. We'll move along to item 8. This is the 2020 Hate Bias Motivated Crime Report. Deputy Chief McIntyre.
Thank you, Chair, through you. If I could, I'll just walk everyone through this because it obviously has a greater meaning, I think, today, and especially in this month. Although the first thing I want to point out is that this is obviously a 2020 report. It's tabled at this time based out of adequacy. It goes to the board every year around in May. This one was just delayed in coming to the board, but just know right at the outset, it's 2020 data we're looking at. A couple of things that are important to recognize, and this is a tracking language, but it's, there's some sensitivities around the language. So I just want to explain a couple definitions. So the report speaks and delineates between hate crime, which we know is a criminal offense that's committed against a person or property when there's that perceived motivation by hate or some type of bias or prejudice. So we understand hate crime. There's a criminal code, like it's a crime, and it meets the definition of that. When we delineate and move that away to a hate incident, it's a behavior that's motivated by that. It still has absolutely the same amount of impact, but it doesn't constitute a criminal offense. So an example I could give you here, as you try to sort out the definitions yourself, is like either hostile speech or a racial slur, or maybe there's a comment on a sign or something is said, but it doesn't necessarily meet the threshold that would constitute a criminal offense. But either in both cases, they're both hugely impactful to the community. They both cause harm. They both are hate-based, and so we track both of them. But I just wanted to just spend a moment just to highlight kind of those differences. So if we move through the report, we track a bunch of different things, and I hope it's kind of clear in the report, but I just want to kind of give you some highlights of things that I watch for and observe as we go through this. So we see right away on page 2 of the report, if you're following along, last year we had 44 hate crimes reported and 49 hate incidents reported. And as Councillor Cassidy spoke to, it comes to us various ways. So it could be identified right away from the member calling it in as a hate-related occurrence, or it could be categorized as such by the police service once we receive the report and the complaint. We see that they're up. It's not necessarily linear, but we see that they're up. And when you know that we receive over 100,000 calls a year, we know that this is just a fraction. What we see here is truly that tip of the iceberg. I think there's reference in StatCam reports that 2/3 go unreported. And I think it's interesting to see that those numbers and that shift in numbers. So why is that? Well, I think we see that historically they're underreported. So why now? Why do we see this uptake now? And I think there's multiple factors there. I think increased level of public awareness, increased willingness of the public to report it to police. I think increased training by the police to recognize certain crimes and incidents as hate-related and motivated. I think we've just recently learned, and everyone felt this around the world, about a call for action and change and standing up and not letting those things that often maybe on the surface to some are innocuous, but so impactful to others that people are more compelled to do what is right and to make that report into police. I think we see increased trust in some segments of the community to the police, and that our willingness to reach out in that community support and the work of our diversity team to really build and nurture those relationships maybe lends a sense of trust to the police, and that they would be heard, that we will validate the concern and take it seriously. So I think there's multiple things there moving that drive that number forward. If we look at the data specifically in the report, we can see one trend that jumps off the page. So last year, we knew with the death of George Floyd, we saw a huge number, an increase rather. I can't say huge number because really we have a small data set, but a number increase post that. So 72% of the occurrences reported in 2020 occurred after the George Floyd incident. So there's that call for action. There's that recognition, that increased public awareness, the need to do something to move forward as a community in an improved manner. So, and when you look at, we break it down into the targeted group, you can see from, post the George Floyd incident, 8 occurrences were reported specifically about the Black community prior to that. And then after the George Floyd incident, 28 occasions, members of the Black community were targeted. So we see a major jump there in reporting. I think it's interesting to note that the bulk of those occurrences were reported in that 7 months that followed. So we will see that in trends, and that's not unlike national reporting follows those same trend styles, if you will. I think, but it's a need to report that. So when we talk about what types of crimes, what is this related to? What is the occurrence type? We see right at the forefront is property damage related, then followed by violence. You'll see that those vary throughout the years, and they're up and down all over. But again, I just give you some caution there because our data set is relatively small. So just watch for statistical relevance there. I think at the end of the day, a takeaway from the report is about the outreach. It's about our education of our officers. It's about the education of the community. It's about this need to do things better and to improve relations with everyone in our community. And I think we all heard a very loud lesson about that this month. So the need to report is so critical. And we are not done here. I think it will always be a moving target as we improve relations with the community, but improve reporting and then our action following. So in a nutshell, that's my report. And recommendation that you receive the report, and of course I'm open to questions.
Thank you. I'd like to share some comments as a board member, not as board chair. So I'm just going to turn the chair over to Councillor Helmer for a moment.
Okay, I'll take the chair, and I recognize Javid Zakara. Go ahead.
So I just wanted to share some comments. Year after year, I review these reports, intricately, and I consider what the data can show us. This week, as you all know, these numbers became far too human. In the wake of the tragedy that took place in our city, I've had multiple members of diverse Muslim communities reach out to me about their experiences in their communities. I want to take this opportunity to speak personally to any individual who encounters hate, to encourage them to report it whenever they can. As has been noted, far too many of these incidents go unreported. It's clear from this data and from our own knowledge and experience that when there's a large public event, there's a traumatizing effect that this has on an entire community. Whether it's words on a screen or verbal threats or vandalism, there are many who experience these types of incidents and are too afraid to speak up about them. Many of them suffer in silence. I know that the LPS takes these incidents very seriously as they understand the impact that they have on the physical and mental well-being of individuals and communities. I also know how seriously our chief takes this. And I want to thank the LPS and personally thank Chief Williams, who have all gone above and beyond in the past week in a way that it's difficult for me to express in words. I also personally acknowledge the sensitivity and compassion of the civilian and non-civilian members of our service. I also want to add that there's still things that we can do better when it comes to reporting of such incidents. As noted by the Deputy Chief today, these reports are part of education and outreach. But in addition, it's imperative that those receiving reports and interacting with members of the public are trained in the principles of trauma-informed practices. That's because when a member of the community builds up courage to make a report, there is a risk of them being re-traumatized in that process. If anyone receiving that call minimizes someone's experience in any way, there is a tangible harm that can result. We all know that there are nuances and complexities in the criminal code, but we also know that the sensitivity with which we communicate with those who are reporting such crimes and incidents matters, and whether or not these individuals feel validated and supported matters. So thank you for the chance for sharing my personal comments. And if it's okay with Councillor Helmer, I'll take the chair back.
Thank you. You've got the chair back.
Any additional comments or questions? Okay, if not, then can I get a motion to receive? Moved by Ms. Vollenreiter, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Move along to item 9. This is a semi-annual revenue offsetting personnel cost report. And I'll turn it over to Deputy Chief Betts.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, I will, as you say, present to you the semi-annual revenue offsetting personnel costs. You will have seen the first one of these in January, and I think this is important now as we start to make our way towards the fall and start to look at the 2022 budget, the potential implications here. So as you'll see in Appendix A, there are 21 positions that are partially funded for policing services here in London. These are jobs that would need to be done, whether they were funded or not. And as you can see, there are some significant dollar values. I'm going to draw your attention to the last blue row on that, and that's the court security and prisoner transportation. That is mostly funded here. So that's where we provide our security, transportation of prisoners over at 80 Dundas and of course over at the POA courts. The funding here is set to end at the end of this year. It's by no means stable. As you know, there has been fluctuations in this in the past, up and down. We're currently in an upswing. However, given the experiences that we've had with COVID and some of the changes to court processes, that this particular row presents as a potential risk to our budget for next year, because it's by no means set in stone what we will receive going forward. So I just draw your attention to that. because we receive, as you can see here, a revenue of about $3.3 million towards our overall operating budget. So that's a particularly large piece. Appendix B are the jobs or the positions that we are, it's good to participate in for the better of the community, but the province. And some of these things here are incredibly important, and most of them are 100% funded or close to 100% funded. So these ones are less concerning. However, if the funding were to withdraw from that, those would be things that we'd have to look at, either absorbing the cost of maintaining our participation or choose not to participate. And as I think you'll see in here, there are just things that we would not want to pull from in terms of providing services. So there isn't a whole lot that's new from here other than to draw your awareness to it as we move towards the fall of 2021. Really, this report's just for your information, subject to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Any questions or comments from the board? Councillor Helmer?
I wanted to ask about the court security and prisoner transportation. I appreciate it being flagged as a pressing concern because of the timing for the expiry of the contract. I know we don't have a crystal ball, but do you have some sense of when you think you might have more certainty from the province about what is happening beyond December 2021? If we get to September, for example, and we still don't know what's happening, I'd be ringing the alarm bells pretty loudly at that point. So I just wonder if you have a sense of where it's going over the next little while.
Great question, and Chair, through you. And the short answer is no, we don't have a sense of that. More fulsome answer is that there is a review that was initiated in 2020 of the overall cost to the province with relation to court security and prisoner transportation. That review is underway, but it was largely impacted by the changes to the way prisoners are dealt with, subject to court closures and postponements of cases due to the COVID pandemic. So it's really difficult to assess where we will end up on that. I can tell you that there was some discussion around what constituted a billable hours, if you will, for the purposes of court security, and we were able to, and all police services were able to impress upon the Solicitor General's office that our members are required to be employed full-time, and the courts could have been called back any particular time in 2020. So we were able to maintain our funding for 2020. That remains stable, and it remains stable into 2021. We typically won't know until we get even closer to the end of 2021 what our forecast will look like for 2022. It's in large part due to this review that's ongoing right now. Hence the reason I flag it as a risk.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any additional questions or comments? If not, can I get a motion to receive report for informational purposes? Moved by Mayor Holder, seconded by Ms. Wellenreiter. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Moving along, item 10 is our 2020 annual report. Deputy Chief Betts.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to the rest of the board and those present. This year's report, as you have see it here, is optimized for web-based viewing versus hard copies. So this makes it a little more accessible and able to reach a greater audience in a format that's more easily accessed. So the year of 2020, of course, was challenging, both for our community and our service, and the pandemic has impacted us in many ways that are reflected throughout this report. In fact, you'll see many of the photos in this report are with protective masks, because that represents the reality of 2020 for the annual report. Where we're not wearing masks, we've taken great care to provide a disclaimer that those photos were taken prior to the pandemic requirements for masking and distancing. The London Police Service Corporate Support and Continuous Improvement Branch and our Media Relations Office and Corporate Communications really deserve the kudos for presenting what you have here before you today. New to this annual report on page 15 is a quick facts section. It provides quick, easy to understand views, infographics of our service in terms of jurisdiction and service delivery, and just some interesting information about the London Police Service that may not be so readily available or accessible to people who want to know a little bit more about the policing service here in our community. On page 25, you'll see the report references things like response times and code levels. I know that sometimes generates some questions about, well, what is a code 1 occurrence? What's a code 2? And I'd like to take a moment just to provide a little bit of context around that. Code 1 responses, as you have seen them here, they are those emergent calls, life-threatening in nature, in process, or just occurred. There's some sense of threat to life or weapons present. Those are the ones where you see the police cars going down the street with their lights and sirens. So from a code 1 perspective, that's what you're considering. Code 2 are those responses that are urgent in nature. They may be in progress or having just occurred, but they're not necessarily life-threatening. And then code 3 are the less urgent. They may be older or what we would consider temporally based cold in that they've happened several hours past. They're not life-threatening, and the chance of catching a suspect on site are probably remote. So there's a difference in the way we dispatch those calls for service, the way that the numbers of officers are, and quite obviously we focus according to the threat to people's safety and welfare. On page 27, you'll see that the report references dispatched calls for service for the past decade and how they've remained relatively consistent, but time on calls has increased somewhat. And you might wonder, how do we reconcile that? Well, the nature of the calls have changed. The complexity has increased. It's part of an overall increasing degree of complexity in the justice system. Our efforts are changing and our responses have changed to try and keep pace. We have increased our availability of online reporting. We've increased the use of our enhanced services unit to handle those lower threshold offenses that might be dealt with over the phone or can be started by an officer here in the station while waiting for an officer to come to the premise. And of course, you're most aware of the recent introduction of the COAST team to help try and prevent mental health engagement with responding officers where we can. So this report also provides you with historical comparisons of crime statistics, including, as Deputy McIntyre provided, clearance rates, percentage differences from 2019 to 20, and 5-year averages and detailed crime data comparisons. We also provide a breakdown of the 2020 operating expenses, and would point out that much to Jeff Lang's observations earlier, the operating budget is the majority of our expenses. 95% of our gross budget goes towards salaries and benefits. And then, of course, I would like to also point out that no police agency, including the London Police Service, possibly hope to meet the needs of the community with their members alone. We rely on our auxiliary officers and our volunteers, and they typically volunteer more than 7,000 hours a year to the community. There are 50 auxiliary officers who work alongside our sworn members and provide much needed services to Londoners. This report also showcases the sworn and civilian members' commitment to volunteering within the community, and it's in the section titled "In the Community." The end of 2020 marked the completion of the second year of our business plan, the Vision for a Safer London, and a progress report is included as required by adequacy standards in the provincial mandate. A copy of this report will be provided to Council in accordance with the existing protocol with Council that requires it to be delivered by July 1st each year. So my recommendation is that the board receive this report for their information, and as an update to the City Council, we will provide that on behalf of the board. Subject to any questions.
Any questions or comments from board members?
Just
Ms.
that I thought it was,
Wellenreiter?
thank you. Just that I thought that it was a very well done report, very easy to follow and comprehensive, and a lot of great insight into the work that you do.
Thank you. Councillor Helmer?
Yeah, similarly, I wanted to say I think there's a lot of things that happen over the course of 1 year that the police service is responding to, and so many different aspects of the organization that need to be covered in a report like this. And I think of all the things to highlight, the things that you managed to focus in on in this particular report, I think well chosen in terms of where to highlight things, how to draw people's attention to the things that really matter. It's not really a lot of pages to try and communicate some important things about what's going on in the police service. And I thought, not to say anything negative about previous reports, but this one has got a lot of information packed into not very many pages. You know, it's a little bit dense, honestly, to read it. It's like there's a lot in there if you're reading it through. I think it's communicated very well visually, and it's not using a lot of words to convey some of the key stuff. There's a lot of work went into, I think, the visualizations. And so just to the team that worked on the report itself, I think it's very well done. Trying to communicate the broad range of things that are happening at the police service, and in a year that was very difficult one for policing.
Go ahead, Deputy Chief.
Chair, if I may, I want to thank you both for those comments, and I can tell you that the team that worked on this report are present in this meeting today, and I know that those words will mean an awful lot to them. They spent a lot of time working on this. They've done a fantastic job, so thank you for that.
Thank you. I hope they get some time off this summer as well. Any other questions? If not, can I get a motion to receive? Moved by Mr. Lang, seconded by Ms. Wollenreiter. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Okay, we're moving right along, and we have a new business item related to 3 SIU reports that are posted on the LPS website. I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Chief McIntyre.
Thank you, Chair, through you. So attached to new business are 3 SIU investigations. Those reports are online here, but they're also, know that for members of the public, SIU publishes each of these reports on their website as well. So you can get a comprehensive kind of review of all of those investigations and the related outcomes. But if I were just to highlight them at a high level for you, in each of those reports, there was involvement with the police and a citizen. There was a defined serious injury that resulted, which triggered, of course, SIU to come in and to conduct that investigation away from and impartial from the police. So in all cases, the director at the end of the day determined that the officers involved and any related use of force they used was justified and reasonable in those circumstances. We conduct a parallel review. So our own investigators here through our professional standards branch conduct a parallel review that looks at LPS policy procedure, the services of the LPS, but also the conduct of the officers involved. So although the SIU director might not have found them culpable for any use of force or any actions taken, we look at it at a real microscopic level for policy and procedure, and then just high level service delivery. So in each of those cases, there were no identified issues determined. The officers complied fully with LPS procedure and cooperated fully with the investigation as per the legislation. So I just thought I would highlight those pieces without reviewing all 3 in detail. I'm more than happy to take any questions you may have, but note that they are all online, not only here, but also on the SIU website for transparency. And just a recommendation that the board receive these 3 reports. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Cassidy?
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and through you to the Deputy Chief. A question about the length of time of, if I remember the details from the report, I don't think that any of these investigations seem to be super long, but I know that that has been an issue in the past when an SIU investigation has been going on. Have you seen an improvement in that and how long it's taking for these investigations to be conducted?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. It has been a marked improvement, I would say, over the past. There was, of course, a legislative change that required the SIU to report back in more of a timely manner, I could say. That would be my opinion. But I have seen an improvement in those. Before, we saw really protracted delays and really not justifiable. And we know that these investigations are incredibly stressful for our members. You know, no one gets into the role of policing wanting or, you know, ever hoping to be charged criminally with an offense when that's what we're here to enforce. And so they're huge stress. So we have seen a marked improvement in that. And I have, with the legislation, I expect that improvement in that turnaround time to continue in a positive manner. So thank you.
Follow up to that, Mr. Chair. is it a norm for a police service to run the parallel investigation, or is this just something that London Police Service does differently?
For you, Chair, it is the norm. And so that is legislated out of the PSA that we run that investigation. It's often that the service runs that because it is about policy, procedure, service delivery, but also the misconduct piece. So it is, and it is legislated and designates the chief of that service to run that investigation.
Great. So, Mr. Chair, I just want to comment that, you know, of course, people, and I understand the stress that members are experiencing when they're under an investigation of any kind, but it is something that the public expects the police service to be held to a higher standard, and I think our service does an extremely good job. I think we have, you know, we've seen the statistics that you showed us today, how effective and professional and really amazing the members, civilian and non-civilian, are in our police service, and going right on up to the leadership, because that's where the tone is set. So these investigations, unfortunately, are necessary. I'm glad to hear that the timing has been shortened, that they're being more responsive and getting through these much more quickly. And when you read the details of these investigations, you see the work that our police officers are doing every single day. It's dangerous work. People sometimes get hurt because, you know, they're doing things they shouldn't be doing, and that's what the police are tasked with, is stopping them from doing those things and keeping our community safe. So it is, I've spoken of family members that have served in the past. I have young family members that serve on other police forces. So I'm aware of the danger inherent in the job, and I'm happy, really happy with the job that's being done, and proud to be associated with this organization. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Any additional comments or questions? If not, can I get a motion to receive? Moved by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Mayor Holder. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. So that is it for our public agenda. I hope that everyone does get a chance to unplug and wind this summer and take care of themselves and each other. And I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Ms. Wellenreiter, seconded by Councillor Helmer. All in favor? Carried. Thank you, everyone, and we hope to see you at our next public meeting on September 16th.